a massive Pittsburgh Penguins update to go over today, as Kyle Dubas has officially revealed his master plan for the Penguins rebuild, and he's revealed a tidbit on the future of not only Erik Karlsson, but head coach Mike Sullivan and his future in Pittsburgh. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Penguins Digest. But before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 68% of you who watch these videos are not actually subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with your Pittsburgh Penguins as we head into a very busy offseason for Kyle Dubas, like we're going to get into in this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It is free, and you get to stay up to date with everything going on with the Penguins. But Mark, let's dive right into it today. Kyle Dubas spoke out on his offseason plans, everything that he's planning for the Penguins in the future, and some interesting quotes, that is for sure, that we will get into. And the first thing here is Mike Sullivan has had discussions with Kyle Dubas about the Washington Capitals and the model they've kind of followed the last couple of years, because everyone, I think, was thinking the Capitals were headed for, just trying to get Ovi the record. They weren't trying to build up a team that, was going to win any games or make the playoffs. And here they are with a very skilled team, and they didn't really tear anything down per se, right? So in the full quote, he said, we've certainly had discussions about where we're at and strategizing where we want to go and how we want to get there. There's different ways to do that. There are some teams that strip it right down to the studs. That's one strategy. And there's other teams that have reshaped their teams on the fly, kind of like what the Washington Capitals have done, and many other teams over the years as well. Even the Pittsburgh Penguins to a degree a couple of years ago. So, Mark, I want to get your thoughts on this first before we get into some shocking comments from Kyle Dubas. But, what are your thoughts on this? Is this the way the Pittsburgh Penguins should go? I think this is the right thinking for this team, because you've already made your bed. Ron Hextall made his, the Penguins' bed here, signing Malkin and Crosby and all these other guys. So I think they've made their bed in terms of that. But what are your thoughts on this?
Listen, when you have the best two-way player in the National Hockey League with Sidney Crosby, you can't tear it all down. We've seen the Capitals, and listen, we're not going to hype up the Capitals too much, but what they did was perfect. They lost Nick Backstrom, they got Dylan Strome, took a flyer on him, and now he's a point-per-game player. We've seen the Capitals dominate the East with their quick read tool, and I do think this is the perfect route for Pittsburgh to go. They still have key talent in the lineup: Crosby, Malkin, Letang. Karlsson's here. They do need to fill a lot out. Goaltending could get a little better, depth scoring. But the biggest thing is, if you tear this down to the studs, you might be stuck in the situation kind of like Chicago is at the moment. They moved on from their players. They lost a few players as well, but this is a team that just can't string together wins. We know they got Connor Bedard, but this team does not have what it takes to really compete for the next couple of years. Yes, it can work. It's working with the Sharks. They were terrible this year, but they do have a bright future. But with the Crosby era still here, you still have a couple of seasons of Sidney Crosby. I think you need to really go in. Listen, if you want to retool this offseason, going into the season, see what happens, then make a big push in its final 2 seasons. Yeah, sure, go for it. But do not tear this down to the studs with what you have.
Yeah, I don't think that's the right course of action for this team. And like you said, you brought up a great example of a team that did do that but got lucky, and that's the San Jose Sharks. And Kyle Dubas had some comments about, doing something like that, tearing it down to the studs. And he went on to say that, you can go into a mass teardown rebuild and hope that you get lucky with the lottery and hope that all this happens, but you can hope in one hand and bleep in the other and see which one fills up first. And honestly, when I saw this quote, Mark, at first I was like, what is Kyle Dubas talking about here? This is a shocking quote, but I do have to say, after seeing the full context of what he was talking about, I agree with the current circumstances of this team. And as you can see, the same quote here, I do agree with him in terms of, the circumstances, this team, surrounding the team, I should say, where, you shouldn't do a full tear down, especially with Sidney Crosby signing Malkin, right? Try and retool on the fly like we've seen the Washington Capitals do around Ovi and some older guys that they have on that team still, right? Tom Wilson isn't necessarily that old, but he is an older guy and a guy who's won a Stanley Cup. So I think that's the correct course of action. And he is right in terms of, hope in one hand, bleep in the other. Which one's going to fill up first? I think we all know, right? So there is a lot that, could happen, that is happening the last couple of days. I want your thoughts on Erik Karlsson as well, because there's been a lot made out of Erik Karlsson the last couple of days. Kyle Dubas has come out like straight up and challenged Erik Karlsson to be better next year. What are your thoughts on Erik Karlsson as a Penguin so far, and what he can do to maybe, have a better season next year? Or is this just what he is at this point?
I mean, the worst thing with Erik Karlsson, listen, still a great player, but I think at the money amount you're giving him, it kind of leaves a sour taste in a lot of fans' mouths. This was a guy that we expected to come in, and he won a Norris with the San Jose Sharks before coming to Pittsburgh. We were expecting maybe this type of season, and he hasn't really hit it. Listen, the defense hasn't been the best. We know Ryan Graves' contract is not great on this team either, but I do think there is value for Erik Karlsson around the league, and maybe it's time for Pittsburgh just to move on from him. There has to be a team that's willing to take him. You might have to retain some money, and you don't really want to get into a habit of doing this. I do think Erik Karlsson can still compete. We've seen him play in the Four Nations. He looked good during this. He has stretch of the season where he looks great, but then there's also the stretches where you're like, hey, do we even trust him as a fifth or sixth defenseman? So it's going to get interesting. I do think Dubas is right. He needs to step up. He needs to get where he wants to be. He can't just say, hey, I want to be here. He needs to make that next step to get there. And if not, I think you need to do everything you can to maybe just move on from him and try to find younger defensemen to grow with this team.
Absolutely. And I think it was his first move as GM to bring in Erik Karlsson. And even at the time, I was like, this is a little puzzling. But besides that move, I do have to say, he's done a decent job in terms of asset management and flipping certain players and getting certain things back in return. As you can see here, Kyle Dubas has turned the first kind of, thing there with Marcus Pettersson, Drew O'Connor, Michael Bunting, Anthony Beauvillier, Cody Glass, all of these players that you see on different teams. Beauvillier now with the Washington Capitals, actually, and he's turned them into some roster players, some good players. I mean, Connor Timmins, right? Like he made a decent trade there to get a couple roster players back from Toronto. And then Danton Heinen's a player that I think you can win with if you, eventually build up the roster to a point where you can make the playoffs. So, and again, he's got a lot of draft picks out of it, 2 second-round picks, a first-round pick, a third-round pick. Like, he's done some good asset management, but now it's time to build the team up again and retool on the fly like he's been talking about. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does that. And we also have an update on, and I wanted to touch on this before we wrap up the video, and we'll probably have another full video on this because things are about to get a little bit crazy because I've heard some things out of New York as well as it pertains to Mike Sullivan. But Kyle Dubas was asked if Mike Sullivan will be back next year, and the answer wasn't as clear-cut as you might think. And he said, I haven't had any postseason meetings with Sully, which I think is pretty crazy. I think that, you should probably meet after the season, but just with the way the season ended, with it being a holiday, so he'll meet with Sully tomorrow. This is, yesterday that he met with him, and Sully is under contract. I think he was very clear with his intentions last week and what he expressed in our conversation. So sounds like Mike Sullivan wants to stay in Pittsburgh, but it doesn't sound like Kyle Dubas is overly enthusiastic to say he is going to stay in Pittsburgh. And I know for a fact, with a lot of things coming out in New York, Chris Drury of the New York Rangers, even if Sullivan is under contract, will do some things to get this guy out of Pittsburgh. So that's what I'm hearing right now. But what are your thoughts on Mike Sullivan? I think he's a great coach. Obviously, won Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins, but is it the type of thing that maybe he's overstayed his welcome with the team?
I mean, the biggest thing is, and I think the easiest way to look at this, maybe you make the coaching change and it changes the entire atmosphere of this team. They go into next season on a run, but you could also move on from one of the fan favorite coaches, a coach that's been with them for multiple Stanley Cups, and it kind of pulls the locker room apart. So listen, it's going to get really tough to figure this out. He wants to return. Dubas does seem very on the edge, but there are a lot of good coaches hitting the open market. I mean, Vancouver just let Rick Tocchet walk out of his extension with no just signing in place. So maybe Rick Tocchet returns to Pittsburgh, takes over the reins. Maybe we see another coach. Seattle moved on from their coach. There's going to be a lot of coaching changes. John Tortorella probably is the best to avoid, but this is a team that maybe needs that change. And listen, if they bring back Mike Sullivan, I'm not going to be upset. If they move on, I'll be a tiny bit upset, but I wouldn't be overly mad.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting with Mike Sullivan. I think that if he is to leave this summer, it's not going to be because he's fired. I do wonder if he ends up stepping down and taking another job somewhere else. And then, the Tocchet thing is very interesting out of Vancouver, like you mentioned as well. There's a lot of coaches moving around this year. Dan Bylsma, like you just said, let go from Seattle. So there's going to be, and, he has some experience with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm not sure he's the right fit for this team right now, but he has some experience with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So something to keep an eye on, that's for sure. But there's a lot going on, and we are going to keep you updated here on the channel for everything to do with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So let us know in the comments what you think of Kyle Dubas's plans. I do have to say I agree with it. I don't think you should do a full teardown to the studs. It doesn't make sense with the current makeup of this roster. Do something similar to what the Washington Capitals have done and rebuild on the fly. And I think he's made some decent moves to move towards that. That is for sure. And you do have to get a little bit lucky in the draft as well, I think. So it's going to be interesting. Let us know in the comments what you think about that. Mike Sullivan, and obviously Erik Karlsson, what he needs to do to get back on track next season. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything Pittsburgh Penguins.